potion. Okay. Let no one ever say that a poor tailor couldn't do great things and win high honor. All that is needed is you should go to the right smithy, and what is most consequence that he should have good luck. A civil adort tailor's apprentice once went traveling and came into a green forest, and he did not know the way. He lost himself. Night fell, and nothing was left for him to do but to seek a bed in this painful solitude. He might certainly have found a good bed on the soft moss, but the fear of wild beasts let him have no rest there. And at last he was forced to make up his mind to spend the night in a tree. He sought out a high oak, climbed up to the top of it, and thanked God that he had his goose with him, for otherwise the wind which blew over the top of the tree would have carried him away. After he had spent some hours in the darkness, not without fear and trembling, he saw at a very short distance the glimmer of a light, and he thought that a human habitation might be there, where he could be better off than on the branches of a tree. He got carefully down and went towards the light. It guided him to a small hut that was woven together of reeds and rushes. He knocked boldly, the door opened, and by the light which came forth he saw a little hoary old man, who wore a coat made of bits of colored stuff sewn together. "Who are you, and what do you want?" asked the man in a grumbling voice. "I am a poor tailor," he answered, whom night has surprised here in the wilderness, and I earnestly beg you to take me into your hut until morning." "Go away," replied the old man in a surly voice. "I'll have nothing to do with rascals. Seek shelter elsewhere." After these words, he was about to slip into his hut again, but the tailor held him so tightly by the corner of his coat and pleaded so pitilessly that the old man, who was not so ill-natured as he wished to appear, was at last softened and took him into the hut with him, where he gave him something to eat, and then pointed out to him a very good bed in a corner. The weary tailor needed no rocking, but slept swiftly till morning, but even then would not have thought of getting up if he had not been aroused by a great noise. A violent sound of screaming and roaring forced its way through the thin walls of the hut. The tailor, full of unwonted courage, jumped up, put his clothes on in a haste, and hurried out. Then close by the hut he saw a great black bull and a beautiful stag, which were just preparing for a violent struggle. They rushed at each other with extreme rage, that the ground shook with their trembling, and the air resounded with their cries. For a long time it was uncertain which of the two would gain the victory. At length the stag thrust his horns into his adversary's body, whereupon the bull fell to the earth with a terrific roar, and was thoroughly dispatched by a few strokes from the stag. The tailor, who had watched the fight with astonishment, was still standing there, motionlessly. The stag, in full career, bounded up to him, and before he could escape, caught him up on his great horns. He had not much time to collect his thoughts, for it went in a swift race of stock and stone, mountain and valley, wood and meadow. He held with both hands to the top of the horns, and resigned himself to his fate. It seemed to him, however, just as if he were flying away. At length the stag stopped in front of a wall of rock and gently laid the tailor down. The tailor, more dead than alive, required a longer time than that to come to himself. When he had in some degree recovered, the stag, which had remained standing by, pushed its horn with such force against a door which was in the rock that it sprung open. Flames of fire shot forth, after which followed a great smoke, which hid the stag from his sight. The tailor did not know what to do, or whether to turn in order to get out of this desert and back to human beings again. While he was standing there, thus undecided, a voice sounded out of the rock, which cried to him, "Enter without fear. No evil shall befall thee." He certainly hesitated, but driven by a mysterious force, he obeyed the voice and went through the iron door into a large spacious hall, whose ceilings, walls, and floors were made of shining polished square stones, on each of which were cut letters which were unknown to him. He looked at everything full of admiration, and was on the point of going out again, when he once heard the voice which said to him, "Step on the stone which lies in the middle of the hall." and great fortune awaits thee. His courage had gone so great that he obeyed the order. The stone began to give way under his feet and sank slowly down into the depth. When it was once more firm, the tailor looked around. He found himself in a hall which resembled the foreman. Here, however, there was more to look at and to admire. Hollow places were cut into the walls in which stood vast vases of transparent glass, which were filled with colorful spirits or bluish vapor. On the floor of the hall, two great glass chests stood opposite to each other, which at once excited his curiosity. When he went to one of them, he saw inside it was a handsome structure. Let me bookmark myself. Thank you so much for the raid, Bull, Bull, blah, Wolven. I am so sorry. Um, hello.
I know. You motherfucker!
I'm guessing it's a phasmophobia clip. Bowler Works? Okay. Thank you so much for the raid. My name is Wolven Moonshadow. Dias Wolfman. Thank you so much for the follow. Grab a book, grab some tea and hot chocolate, and settle on into the library. Welcome. Um, we are currently doing art, but it was redeemed to me to read a thank you. How was your stream? Besides playing Phasmophobia, which is, always interesting. Um, it was redeemed for me to read Brothers Grimm very story. So we're doing that before we get back to the art. And thank you so much for the hydrate. But yeah, how was your stream? For those that don't know me, my name is Wolven Moonshadow. I am a variety streamer. I stream art. I stream RPG games. I stream uh, just about anything, really. Aw, thank you. Spooky Night with Friends. Yeah. Aw, thank you. But I hope you guys. Well, thank you so much for the follow. Grab a book, grab some tea, not chocolate, and settle on in. But yeah, we're almost done. Yeah, we're just enjoying it, and this is actually quite new. I was like, heck, I have books lying around. I'm a librarian. I can read to people. I can do things, and I have found something really done that I need you to do. Okay, you can just message me, Batslove. Okay, we are almost done with the story, so we'll get back to that. On the floor of the hall, two great glass chests stood opposite to each other, which at once excited his curiosity. When he went to one of them, he saw inside it was a handsome structure like a castle surrounded by farm buildings, stables, and barns. Thank you so much for the work, Das Wolfman. And quantity of other good things. Everything was small, but exceedingly careful and delicately made, and seemed to be cut out by a words well crafted hand. I'm going to go with the greatest exactitude. He might not have turned his eye away from the consideration of this rarity for some time. If the voice had not once made itself heard, it ordered him to turn around and look at the glass chest which was standing opposite. How his admiration increased when he saw therein a maiden of the greatest beauty. She lay as if asleep and were wrapped in her fair long hair as if in a precious mantle. Her eyes were close shut, but the brightness of her complexion and a ribbon which her breathing moved to and fro left no doubt she was alive. The tailor was looking at the beauty with a beating heart when she suddenly opened her eyes and stared up at the sight of him in joyful terror. Just heaven, cried she. My deliverance is at hand. Quick, quick, help me out of my prison. If you push back the bolt of this glass coffin, then I shall be free. The tailor obeyed without delay, and she immediately raised up the glass lid, came out, and hastened into the corner of the hall, where she covered herself with a large cloak. Then she seated herself on a stone, ordered the young man to come to her, and after she imprinted a friendly kiss on his lips, she said, My long-desired deliverer, kind heaven has guided you to me, and put an end to my sorrows. On the self-same day when they ended shall your happiness begin. You are the husband chosen for me by heaven, and you shall pass your life into unbroken joy, loved by me, rich to overflowing in every earthly possession. Seat yourself and listen to the story of my life. I am the daughter of a rich count. My parents died when I was still in my tender youth, and recommended me in their last will to my elderly brother, by whom I was brought up by. We loved each other so tenderly and were so alike in our way of thinking and our inclinations that we both embraced the resolution to never marry, but to stay together to the end of our lives. And in our house, there was no lack of company. Neighbors and friends visited us often and showed us the greatest hospitality to everyone. So it came to pass one evening that a stranger came riding to our castle, and under pretext of not being able to get on to the next place, begged for shelter for the night. We granted his request with ready courtesy, and he entertained us in the most agreeable manner during supper by conversation intermingled with stories. My brother liked the stranger so much that he begged him to spend a couple of days with us, to which, after some hesitation, he consented. We did not rise from the table until late at night. The stranger was shown to a room, and I hastened, as I was tired, to lay my limbs in my soft bed. Hardly had I slept for a short time when the sound of a faint and delightful music awoke me. As I could not conceive from whence it came, I wanted to summon my waiting maid, who slept in the next room, but to my astonishment, I found that speech was taken away from me by an unknown force. I felt as if a mountain was weighing down on my breast, and I was unable to make the very slightest sound. In the meantime, by the light of my night lamp, I saw the stranger enter my room through two doors which were fastly bolted. He came to me and said that by magic arts, which were at his command, he had caused the lovely music to sound in order to awaken me, and that now he's forced his way through the fastenings with the intention of offering me his hand and heart. That's a very bad way to say hello. My repugnance to his magic arts was, however, so great that I vouchsafed him no answer. He remained for a time standing without moving, apparently with the idea of waiting for a favorable decision. But as I continued to keep silence, he angrily declared he would revenge himself and find means to punish my pride, and left the room. I passed the night in the greatest fear, I'm going to say, because I don't know the freaking hell what that word is, and only fell asleep towards morning. When I awoke, I hurried to my brother, but did not find him in his room. And the attendants called me he had ridden forth with a stranger to the chase by daybreak. I at once suspected nothing good. I dressed myself quickly, ordered my palfrey to be saddled, and accompanied only by one servant, rode full gallop to the forest. The servant fell with his horse and could not follow me, for the horse had broken its foot. I pursued my way without halting, and in a few minutes I saw the stranger coming towards me with a beautiful stag, which he led by a cord. I asked him where he left my brother, and how he had come by the stag, whose out of greatest eye I saw tears flowing. Instead of answering me, he began to laugh loudly. I fell into a rage at this, pulled out a pistol and discharged it at the monster, but the ball rebounded from his breast and went into my horse's head. I fell to the ground, and the stranger muttered some words which deprived me of consciousness. When I came to my senses, I found myself in this underground cave in a glass coffin. The magician appeared once again, and he said he changed my brother into a stag. My castle, with all the belongings to it, diminished in size by his arts. He had shut up in the other glass chests, and my people, who were all turned into smoke, he confined into glass bottles. He told me that if I would now comply with his wish, it was an easy thing for him to put everything back to its former state, as he had nothing to do but open the vessels, and everything would return once more to its natural form. I answered him as little as I had done the first time. He vanished and left me in my prison, in which a deep slumber, fucking hell, which a deep sleep came to me. Among the visions which passed before my eyes, that the most comforting in it was which a young man came and set me free. And when I opened my eyes today, I saw you, and beheld my dream fulfilled. Help me to accomplish the other things which happen in these visions. The first is that we lift the glass chest in which my castle is enclosed on that broad stone. As soon as the stone was laden, it began to rise up with the maiden and the young man, and mounted through the opening of the ceiling into the upper hall, from whence they then could reach easily in the open air. Here the maiden opened the lid, and it was marvelous to behold how the castle, the houses, and the farm buildings, which were enclosed, stretched themselves out and grew into their natural size with the greatest rap- rapidity. After this, the maiden and the tailor returned to the cave beneath the earth, and the vessels which were filled with smoke carried up by the stone. Tori0770, thank you so much for the follow. Grab a book, grab some tea, hot chocolate, and settle on in. How you doing? The maiden, after this, the maiden and the tailor returned to the cave beneath the earth and had the vessels which were filled with smoke carried up by the stone. The maiden had scarcely opened the bottles when the blue smoke rushed out and changed itself into living men, in whom she recognized her servants and her people. Her joy was still more increased when her brother, who had killed the magician in the form of a bull, came out of the forest toward them in his human form. And on the self same day, the maiden, in accordance with her promise, gave her hand at the altar to the lucky tailor. The end. We are going to read The Singing Bone tonight. A certain country was greatly troubled by a wild boar that attacked workers in its fields, killed men, and tore them to pieces with his terrible tusks. The king of the country had offered riches to reward anyone who would rid the land of this terror. But the beast was so huge and ferocious that no man could even be pursued to enter the forest where the animal made its home. At last, the king made a proclamation that he would give his only daughter in marriage to any man who would bring the wild boar to him, dead or alive. There lived two brothers in that country, the sons of a poor man, who gave notice of their readiness to enter this perilous undertaking. The elder, who was clever and crafty, was influenced by pride. The younger, who was innocent and simple, offered himself from the kindness of heart. Thereupon the king advised that, as the best and safest way would be to take opposite directions in the wood, the elder was to go in the evening and the younger in the morning. The younger had not gone far when a little fairy stepped up to him. He held in his hands a black spear and said, "I will give you this spear because your heart is innocent and good. With this you can go out and discover the wild boar, and he shall not be able to harm you." He thanked the little man, took the spear, placed it on his shoulder, and without further delay went further into the forest. It was not long before he espied the animal coming toward him and ferociously making ready to spring. But the youth stood still and held the spear firmly in front of him. In wild rage, the fierce beast ran violently toward him and was met by the spear on the point which he threw himself, and as it pierced his heart, he fell dead. Then the youngster took the dead monster on his shoulder and went to find his brother. As he approached the other side of the wood, where stood a large hall, he heard music and found a number of people dancing, drinking wine, and making merry. His elder brother was among them, for he thought the wild boar would not be far away, and he wished to get up his courage for the evening by cheerful company and wine. When he caught sight of his younger brother coming out of the forest laden with his booty, the most restless jealousy and malice rose in his heart. But he disguised his bitter feelings and spoke kindly to his brother and said, "Come in and stay with us, dear brother, and rest a while, and get up your strength by a cup of wine." So the youth, not suspecting anything wrong, carried the dead boar into his brother's house and told him of the little man he had met in the wood, who had given him the spear, and how he had killed the wild animal. The brother persuaded him to stay and rest till the evening, and then when they went out together in the twilight. Hey, I always lose my spot. We're good. Then they went out together in the twilight and watched by the river till it became quite dark. A little bridge lay across the river over which they had to pass, and the elder brother let the young one go before him. When they arrived at the middle of the stream, the wicked brother gave his younger a blow from behind, and he fell down dead instantly. But fearing he might not be quite dead, he threw the body over the bridge into the river, and through the clear water saw it sink into the sand. After this wicked deed, he ran home quickly, took the dead wild boar on his shoulder. But fearing he might not be quite dead, he threw the body over the bridge into the river. and through the clear water saw it sink into the sand. After this wicked deed, he ran home quickly, took the dead wild boar on his shoulders, there we go, and carried it to the king, with the pretense that he had killed the animal, and therefore he could claim the princess as his wife, according to the king's promise. But these dark deeds were not often concealed, for something happens to bring them to light. Not many years after, a herdsman passing over the bridge with his flock saw beneath him in the sand a little bone as white as snow, and thought that it would be a very nice mouthpiece for him. As soon as the flock passed over the bridge, he waded into the middle of the stream. For the water was very shallow, took upon the bone and carried it home to make a mouthpiece for his horn. But the first time he blew the horn after the bone was in it, it filled the herdsman with wonder and amazement, for it began to sing it of itself, and these were the words it sang. Ah, dear shepherd, you are blown your horn with one of my bones, which night and morn lie still unburied beneath the wave. Where I was thrown in a sandy grave, I killed the wild boar, my brother slew me, and gained the princess by pretending 'twas he. What a wonderful horn, said the shepherd, that can sing of itself. I must certainly take it to my lord the king. As soon as the horn was brought before the king and blown by the shepherd, it once began to sing the same song, and in the same words. Ah, dear shepherd, you are blowing your horn with one of my bones, which night and morn still lay unburied beneath the wave, where I was thrown in a sandy grave. I killed the wild boar, and my brother slew me, and gained the princess by pretending 'twas he. The king was at first surprised, but his suspicion being aroused. He ordered that the sand on the bridge should be examined immediately, and then the entire skeleton of the murdered man was discovered, and the whole wicked deed came to light. The wicked brother could not deny the deed. He was therefore ordered to be tied to a sack and drowned. For the remains of his murdered brother were carefully carried to the churchyard and laid to rest in a beautiful grave. This is the death of the hen. Once upon a time, the cock and the hen went to the nut mountain, and they agreed beforehand that whichever of them should find a nut was to divide it with the other. Now the hen found a great big nut, but said nothing about it, and was going to eat it all alone, but the kernel was such a fat one that she could not swallow it down, and it stuck in her throat, so she was afraid she should choke. Cock, she cried, run as fast as you can and fetch me some water, or I shall choke. The cock ran fast as he could to the brook and said, Brook, give me some water, the hen is up yonder, choking with a big nut stuck in her throat. But the brook answered, First run to the bride and ask her for some red silk. So the cock ran to the bride and said, Bride, give me some red silk. The brook wants me to give him some red silk. I want him to give me some water, for the hen lies yonder choking on a big nut stuck in her throat. But the bride answered, First go and fetch me my garland that hangs up on a willow. And the cock ran to the willow and pulled the garland down from the brook and brought it to the bride, and the bride gave him the red silk, and he brought it to the brook, and the brook gave him water. Then the cock brought the water to the hen, but alas, it was too late. The hen had choked in the meanwhile, and lay there dead. And the cock was so grieved that he cried aloud, and all the beasts came and lamented for the hen. And 6 mice built a little wagon on which to carry the poor hen to her grave. And when it was ready, they harnessed themselves to it, and the cock drove. On the way, they met a fox. Hello, cock, he cried. Where are you off to? To bury my hen, answered the cock. Can I come too? Said the fox. Yes, if you follow behind, said the cock. So the fox followed behind, and he was joined by the wolf, the bear, the stag, the lion, and all the beasts in the wood. And the procession went on till they came to a brook. How shall we get over, said the cock. Now, in the brook there was a straw, and he said, I'll lay myself across so they may pass over on me. But when the 6 mice had gotten upon this bridge, the straw slipped and fell into the water, and they all tumbled and were drowned, so they were as badly off as ever. When a coal came up and said he would lay himself across, and they might pass over him, but no sooner he touched the water, he hissed, went out, and was dead. A stone, seeing this, was touched with pity, and wishing the cock to help the cock, he laid himself across the stream. And the cock drew the wagon with a dead hen in it safely to the other side, and began to draw the others who followed him fall behind and cross too, but it was too much for him. The wagon turned over and they all tumbled into the water on top of one another and were drowned. The cock was left alone with a dead hen, and he dug a grave and laid her in it. And he raised a mound above her and sat himself down and lamented so sorrow that at last he died, and so they were all dead together. The Rabbit's Bride. There once was a woman who lived with her daughter in a beautiful cabbage garden, and there came a rabbit who ate up all the cabbages. At last the woman said to her daughter, "Go into the garden and drive that rabbit out." "Shoo, shoo," said the maiden. "Don't eat up all of our cabbages, little rabbit." "Come, maiden," said the rabbit. "Sit on my tail and go with me to my rabbit hutch." But the maiden would not. Another day back came the rabbit and ate away at the cabbages until the woman said to her daughter, "Go into the garden and drive away the rabbit." "Shoo, shoo," said the maiden. "Don't eat up all of our cabbages, little rabbit." "Come, maiden," said the rabbit. "Sit on my tail and go with me to my rabbit hutch." But the maiden would not. Again, a third time back came the rabbit and ate away at the cabbages until the woman said to her daughter, "Go into the garden and drive the rabbit away." "Shoo, shoo," said the maiden. "Don't eat up all of our cabbages, little rabbit." "Come, maiden," said the rabbit. "Sit on my tail and go with me to my rabbit hutch." And then the girl seated herself on the rabbit's tail, and the rabbit took her to his hutch. "Now," he said, "set to work and cook me some brawn and cabbage. I'm going to bid the wedding guests." As soon as they were all collected, "Would you like to know who they were?" "Well, I can only tell you what was told to me. All the hares came, the crows who was to be the parson to marry them, and the fox for the clerk, and the altar was under the rainbow." But the maiden was sad because she was so lonely. Get up," said the rabbit. "The wedding folk are all merry." But the bride wept and said nothing. And the rabbit went away, but soon came back again. Get up," said he. "The wedding folk are waiting." But the bride said nothing, and the rabbit went away. Then she made a figure of straw and dressed it in her own clothes, and gave it a red mouth, and set it to wash the kettle of bran, and she went home to her mother. Back again came the rabbit, said, Get up. He went up to hit the straw figure on the head, so it tumbled down. And the rabbit thought that he had killed his bride, and he went away and was very sad. Hey, at least she got back home. We're gonna do the maiden without hands. Okay. So this is the Brothers Grimm, Maiden Without Hands. Emila, who had gradually become very poor, had nothing left but his mill and a large apple tree behind it. One day, when he went into the forest to gather wood, an old man, whom we have never seen before, came toward him and said, "Why do you take trouble to cut down wood? I'll give you great riches if you promise to let me have what stands behind your mill." "That can be no other than my apple tree," thought the miller. I possess nothing else. So he said to the old man, "Yes, I will let you have it." Then the stranger smiled maliciously and said, "In 3 years, I will come again to claim what belongs to me." And after saying this, he departed. As soon as the miller returned home, his wife came toward him and said, "Miller, from where are all these riches come so suddenly to our house?" "Shit." All at once, every drawer and chest had become full of gold. No one brought it here, and I know not where it came from. "Oh," replied her husband, "I know all about it. A strange man who I met in the woods promised me great treasures if I would make him over to where it stood behind the mill. I knew I had nothing there but a large apple tree, so I gave him my promise." "Oh, husband," said the wife in alarm, "that must have been the wizard. He did not mean the apple tree, but our daughter, who was behind the mill sweeping out the court." The miller's daughter was a modest and beautiful maiden, and had lived in innocence and obedience to her parents for 3 years, until the day came on which the wicked wizard was to claim her. She knew he was coming, and after washing till she was pure and clean as snow, she drew a circle of white chalk and stood within. The wizard made his appearance very early, but he did not dare to venture outside the white circle, therefore he could not get near her. In great anger, he said to the miller, "Take away every drop of water that she may not wash, otherwise I shall have no power over her." The frightened miller did as he desired, but on the next morning when the wizard came again, her hands were as pure and clean as ever, for she had wept over them. On this account, the wizard was still unable to approach her, so he flew in a rage and said, "Chop her hands off, otherwise I cannot touch her." Then the miller was terrified and exclaimed, "How can I cut off the hands of my child?" Then the wicked wizard threatened him and said, "If you will not do as I desire you, then I can claim you instead of your daughter and carry you off." The father listened in agony, and in his fright promised to obey. He went to his daughter and said to her, "Oh, my child, unless I cut off your 2 hands, the wizard will take me away with him, and in my anguish I have promised. Help me in my trouble and forgive me for the wicked deed I had promised to do." "Dear father," she replied, "do with me what you will. I am your child." Thereupon, she placed her 2 hands on the table before him, and he cut them off. The wizard came the next day for the 3rd time, but the poor girl had wept so bitterly over the stumps of her arms that they were clean and white as ever. Then he was obliged to give away, for he had lost all rights to the maiden. As soon as the wizard had departed, the miller said, "My child, I have attained so much good through your conduct that for your whole lifetime I shall hold you most precious and dear." "But I cannot stay here, father," she replied. "I am not safe. Let me go away with people who will give me the sympathy I need so much. I fear such people are very seldom to be found in the world," said her father. However, he let her too. So she tied up her maimed arms and went forth on her way at sunrise. For a whole day she traveled without food, and at night found herself near one of the royal gardens. By the light of the moon, she could see many trees laden with beautiful fruit, but she could not reach them because the place was surrounded by a moat full of water. She had been without a morsel to eat the whole day, and her hunger was so great that she could not help cry out, "Oh, if I were only able to get some of that delicious fruit. I shall die unless I shall obtain something to eat very soon." Then she knelt down and prayed for help. And while she prayed, a guardian fairy appeared and made a channel in the water so she would be able to pass through on dry ground. When she entered the garden, the fairy was with her, although she did not know it. So she walked to a tree full of beautiful pears, not knowing that they had been counted. Being not being able to pluck without any hands, she went so close to the tree and ate one with her mouth as it hung. One and no more, just to sate her hunger. The guardian who saw her with the fairy stood near her, thought it was a spirit, and was too frightened to move or speak. After having satisfied her hunger, the maiden went out and laid herself down among the shrubs and slept in peace. On the following morning, the king to whom the garden belonged came out to look at his fruit tree, and when he reached the pear tree and counted the pears, he found one missing. At first, he thought it had fallen, but it was not under the tree, so he went to the gardener and asked what had become of it. Then said the gardener, "There was a ghost in the garden last night, who had no hands and ate a pear off the tree with its mouth." "How could a ghost get across the water?" asked the king. "And what became of it after it ate the pear?" To this, the gardener replied, "Someone came first in snow-white robes from heaven, who made a channel and stopped the flow of water so the ghost walked through on dry ground. It must have been an angel," continued the gardener, "and therefore I was afraid to question or call out. As soon as the spectre had eaten one pear, it went away." Then said the king, "Conceal from everyone what you have told me, and I will wash myself tonight." As soon as it was dark, the king came into the garden and brought a priest with him to address the ghost. And they both seated themselves under a tree, with the gardener standing near, and waited in silence. About midnight, the maiden crept from the bushes and went to the pear tree. And the three watchers saw her eat a pear from the tree without picking it, while an angel stood near in white garments. Then the priest went towards her and said, "Art thou come from heaven or earth? Art thou a spirit or human being?" Then the maiden answered, "Ah me, I am no ghost, only a poor creature forsaken by everyone but God." Then the king said, "You may be forsaken by all the world, but if you let me be your friend, I will never forsake you." So the maiden was taken to the king's castle, and she was so beautiful and modest that the king learned to love her with all his heart. He had silver hands made for her, and very soon after they were married, with a great pomp. About a year after, the king had to go to battle, blah, 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 blah. And he placed his young wife under the care of his mother, who promised to be very kind to her and right to him. Not long after the queen had a little son born, and the king's mother wrote a letter to him immediately, so that he might have the earliest intelligence, and sent it by messenger. The messenger, however, after traveling a long way, became tired and sat down to rest by a brook, where he soon fell fast asleep. Then came the wizard, who was always trying to injure the good queen, took away the letter from a sleeping messenger and replaced it with another, in which it stated that the little child was a changeling. Knowing nothing of the change, the messenger carried this letter to the king, who, when he read it, was terribly distressed and troubled. However, he wrote in reply to say that the queen was to have every attention and care till his return. The wicked wizard again watched for the messenger, and while he was sleeping, exchanged the king's kind letter for another, in which was written to the king's mother in order to kill both the queen and her child. The old mother was quite terrified when she read this letter, for she could not believe the king meant her to do something so dreadful. She wrote again to the king, but there was no answer, for the wicked wizard always interrupted the message and sent false letters. The last was worst of all, for it stated that instead of killing the mother and child, they were to cut out the tongue of the changeling and put it out the mother's eyes. 1 second. I need a drink. The old mother was quite terrified when she read this letter, for she could not believe the king meant to do. Oh, wait, what? Aha, there. But the king's mother was too good to attend these dreadful orders, so she said to the queen, while her eyes streamed with tears, "I cannot kill you both, as the king desires me to, but I must not let you remain here any longer. Go now out into the world with your child, and do not come here again." Then she bound the boy on the mother's back, and the poor woman departed, weeping as she went. After walking some time, she reached a dense forest and knew not which road to take. So she knelt down and prayed for help. As she rose from her knees, she saw a light shining from a window of a little cottage on which hung a small signboard with these words, "Everyone who dwells here is safe." Out of the cottage stepped a maiden dressed in snowy garments and said, "Welcome, queen wife," and led her in. Then she unfastened the baby from his mother's back and hushed him in her arms till he slept so peacefully that she laid him on a bed in another room and came back to his mother. The poor woman looked at her earnestly and said, "How did you know I was queen?" The white maiden replied, "I am a good fairy sent to take care of you and your child." So she remembered in that cottage many years and was very happy and so pious and good that her hands, which had been cut off, were allowed to grow again. And the little boy became her greatest comfort. Not long after she'd been sent away from the castle, the king returned and immediately asked to see his wife and child. Then his older mother began to weep and said, "You wicked man, how can you ask me for your wife and child when you wrote to me such dreadful letters and tell me to kill such innocent beings?" The king, in distress, asked her what she meant, and she showed him the letters she had received, which were changed by the dreadful wizard. Then the king began to weep so bitterly for his wife and child that the old woman pitied him and said, "Do not be so unhappy. They still live. I could not kill them. But your wife and child are gone into the wild world. never to come back for fear of your anger. Then the king said, I will go to the ends of the earth to find them, and I will neither eat nor drink till I find my dear wife, even if I shall die from hunger. Thereupon the king started his expedition, traveling over rocks and valleys, over mountains and highways for 7 long years. But he found her not, and he thought she was starved to death, and that he should never see her again. He never ate or drank during the whole time of earthly food, but heaven sent him help. At last he arrived at a large forest, and found the little cottage with a signboard and words upon it, Everyone who dwells here is safe. While he stood reading the words, the maiden in white raiment came out and took him by the hand and led him to the cottage, saying, My lord the king is welcome, but why is he here? And he replied, I have been for 7 years traveling about the world, hoping to find my wife and child, but I have not succeeded. Can you help me? Sit down, said the angel, and take something to eat and drink first. The king was so tired that he gladly obeyed, for he really wanted to rest. Then he laid himself down and slept, and the maiden in the white raiment covered his face. Then she went to an inner chamber where the queen sat with her little son, who she named Painbringer, and said to her, Go out together into the other chamber. Your husband is come. The poor queen went out, but still sorrowful, for she remembered the cruel letters his mother had received, and knew not that he still loved her. Just as she entered the room, the covering fell off his face, and she told her son to replace it. The boy went forward and laid the cloth gently over the face of the strange man, but the king heard the voice in his slumber and moved his head so the covering fell off again. My child, cover the face of thy father. He looked at her in surprise and said, How can I cover my father's face, dear mother? I have no father in this world. You have taught me to pray to our Father which art in heaven, and I thought my father was God. The strange man is not my father. I do not know him. When the king heard this, he sat up and asked who they were. And the queen said, I am your wife. This is your son. The king looked at her in surprise. Your face and your voice are the same. But my wife had silver hands, and yours are natural. My hands have been allowed to grow again, she replied, and he still doubted. The maiden in white entered the room carrying the silver hands, which she showed the king. Then he saw at once that it was indeed his dear lost wife and his own little son, and he embraced them full of joy, exclaiming, Now has a heavy stone fallen from my heart. The maiden prepared a dinner for them, for which they all partook together, and after a kind farewell, the king started with his wife and child to return home to the castle, where his mother and all the household received them with great joy. A second marriage feast was prepared, and the happiness of their later days made amends for all they have suffered through the wicked demon who had caused them so much pain and trouble. The end.